First of all, when you heard the news of your son's conviction, 20 counts, what went through your mind?
I was relieved because, they had taken that one charge out that had
The aiding the enemy charge.
Yeah. So I was a little bit relieved about that. But then I still did the math in my head and said, well, if he was sentenced to all the other crimes, it'd still be, he'd be 90 to 100 years old before he ever saw the light of day.
Yeah.
And it was kind of upsetting and frightening, that your son's being accused of these horrible breaches of security.
You visited him a number of times early on.
In Quantico,
In Quantico. How did he seem to you? Because at that time, you didn't realize it, but he was being held under extraordinarily tough conditions.
Right. And the interview process, at Quantico was that we basically sat with a glass wall, and he had an open door behind him, and there was one of the guards sat right there, no farther than you and I. Mm-hmm. And so everything that we said, I had to sign a waiver that said I agreed to be videotaped, mm-hmm. but they listened to everything we talked about. Mm. So we never talked anything about his case. I would always ask him, how are you doing physically? And he always come back fine. So
it was only later on you learned of some of the conditions he was being kept under, being stripped, standing in front of guards right. and stuff like that.
I was a bit upset about that because they had co-ed guards there. So I would have been rather embarrassed to know that, a female guard was seeing my son's, sleeping in the nude. He had to sit in uniform on his bunk at attention, except for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and his exercise hour. That's just, I can't imagine having to do that. That to me is torture.
Early on, I know you were defending your son, saying you believe he's innocent, that he is a scapegoat. Do you still believe that he didn't leak classified documents?
In my heart, I believe that.
You believe he's innocent?
Right, and logistically, I can't understand, because knowing the computers as well as I do, how you could get that much data out of a room with three other people in there, sitting in close proximity where everybody could see what everybody was doing. I can't understand how that could be done.
So you think he's being set up?
Well, there was an altercation, I guess, where he struck one of his
superiors,
one of his people that we worked with.
Right.
And so after that, the relationship between, I think it was three other people, really soured. So I don't know if somebody tried to turn the table on him or whatever.
He said to the court, he confessed that he did leak to WikiLeaks, and he said to the court that he wanted to, quote, spark a domestic debate on the role of the military and our foreign policy in general.
Yeah, I think he was grandstanding. He been used to running his life on his own. He was a man of the house, and he had problems adjusting to that. So I feel part of that was he had a lot of pride.
There are some people who believe your son is a hero for what he says he did. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, I get a certain amount of pride when they said, they'd been nominated for the Nobel Prize, and other comments they've made about supporting him.
I'm just trying to see where you are in this, because on the one hand you say there's no justification for leaking classified information, and the other hand, when you hear people call him a hero, it gives you a sense of pride.
Right, and you have to just separate those, because I never, since the day one of when I was in the military with a clearance, to this day, I have never said a single word of what I did.
Right.
And that's going back a long ways. And I would wish he had the character, to stay that way.
So you think if he did leak this information, that would be a wrong thing?
I do.
You do.
To me, it's my country as well, and leaking information that's going to damage my country and the soldiers in our military, that would be very upsetting.
There are reports that your son had been struggling with his sexuality. He had questioned whether he was gay or not. I know he had told you that he was gay. There's also questions about gender identity issues he may or may not have had. There are reports that he had some gender identity issues. Reading that, I know you've followed it. Do you think those were important in what happened to him? That they played some sort of a role?
No, I don't believe so. When he first arrived back from the UK, he sat down with me, after a couple of weeks and said, "Dad, I want you to know I'm gay." And I said, the comment I made was, "Whatever floats your boat," and so I would.
So it was fine. It was fine with you.
Fine with me. I would take him down to the area in Oklahoma City where the gay people would meet. Mm-hmm. There was like 2 different kinds of clubs. One where they were under 21 where they couldn't drink, and there was another one that people over 21 would go, and they'd kind of float in between. And I would take him down there and drop him off.
You'd actually drop off your son at gay bars?
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I don't know if a lot of parents would do that.
Well, if that's what made him happy, I mean, he never made anything that he was blatantly gay.
Right.
He didn't like swish or whatever. People make it sound like they do. Right. And I supported him.
If you were able to talk freely with him, what would you say to him?
I would basically tell him, right off the bat that he had no excuse whatsoever for allegedly releasing that information. I mean, I can't fathom any reason to myself why he should be, that I should forgive him for doing something like that, because it's against my creed or code of honor.
Is there any message you want to get across to him?
I'd like to, and just like in Quantico, but right before we ended our visit, it was always, "I love you, son," and he said, "Love you, Dad." And I'd still love my son.
I'm so sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I appreciate you talking to me.
Okay.